Welcome to Scriptural Snapshots, brought to you by Living Faith Ministries in Kaiser, West Virginia, where we bring the living Word of God into your life. I'm Pastor Gordon Brubaker. We're studying about the home of the brave, and we're using the Star Spangled Banner as our baseline on this study. And the fourth verse is not as well known as the first verse, but I want to share the fourth verse because it contains so much good stuff. It says, "Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved home and the war's desolation." It seems like there's always a war going on. There's always a fight. And the question he's raising is, this is when free men will stand between their home and the war, the fight that has to take place. "Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that has made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, because our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave." Now this is a fourth stanza in the Song of Star-Spangled Banner, and it was written by Francis Scott Key, who was aboard the British ship HMS Surprise. It was one of 19 British warships that were attacking Fort McHenry on September 13th and 14th of 1814. Fort McHenry is in Baltimore Harbor, if you didn't know that. He went on board as a lawyer to protect Dr. Beans, who had been arrested by the British and was being held as a prisoner of war. They were afraid that the British would hang him without a trial, without the protection of law, because that's what the War of 1812 was about, is that the British were capturing U.S. citizens and doing with them as they wanted to. And we said, you can't do this to us. Many people look at the War of 1812 as the Second American Revolution. And through this war, when we won a second time, finally England, who saw us as still as a colony of England finally accepted that we were a free and independent nation. That was the significance and the result of the War of 1812. So Francis Scott Key was risking his own freedom in order to watch over another patriot. This is just another example of the concepts of "in God we trust," framed American ideals as Francis Scott Key risked his own life defending another who stood for God, liberty, and country. And in that order, they stood for God, for liberty, and country. This was not unusual for Francis Scott Key. He had always been one who had opposed slavery. He is one who opposed bondage. He fought for those causes. As a matter of fact, in 1825, he stood before the U.S. Supreme Court and defended 300 slaves that were aboard the ship Antelope, which was captured off of the Florida coast. He spent his own money fighting to free them in an expensive legal battle, which dragged on for 7 years. Slavery was a hot topic then, even in 1825. Since the nation had been founded, slavery was a hot topic, and it was getting more and more intense until it culminated in a civil war in 1860 to free the slaves. Well, for 7 years, Francis Scott Key fought this battle until it finally got to the Supreme Court that these 300 slaves, African slaves, should be set free. And he stepped deliberately into the fire knowing this was such a controversial subject. 4 of the 6 justices on the Supreme Court were slave owners. Key announced, by the law of nature, all men are free. That's what he argued, by nature. By the law of nature, he was meaning by the laws that God has established, all men are free. Remember the Declaration of Independence, that God has granted all men the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To all men, not just a few, but all men. So the Supreme Court, in one of its many shameful decisions, chose to define slaves as property. Francis Scott Key lost the case. Although he lost this argument before this court, he assisted John Quincy Adams as he defended African slaves who were on the Amistad to be set free. And before the U.S. Supreme Court, they won their cause in 1841. The court had changed. The attitudes had changed. They argued the same things. They argued that men are created to be free. And one of the arguments that Francis Scott Key brought up in both cases was that if the slaves that were aboard the ship that was captured, if they were white, we would automatically assume that they were free. But because they're black, we assume that they were automatically slaves. And he said that's not right. He was arguing for civil liberties. He was arguing not by the basis of man's law, but by nature's law, by the law of God, that all men are created in the image of God and all men are free and deserve respect. This is what he fought for. This is what the Star-Spangled Banner is all about, is the concept of liberty, and in God we trust. I'm Pastor Gordon Brubaker. God bless you.